Nicholas McCarthy.
Nicholas McCarthy.
No, Nicholas McCarthy.
Nicholas McCarthy.
Nicholas McCarthy.
Nicholas McCarthy.
The pianist with one arm.
Nicholas McCarthy was born without a right hand.
When I went into playing left-hand alone repertoire, I didn't think that I'm the 21st century one-handed pianist.
I had a couple of people, say, well, how could you do this? You can't play the piano, you've got one hand. And they now know that I am a pianist, so that's quite nice.
I have a huge responsibility for myself as well as future generations of disabled artists. Paul Wittgenstein always dreamed of becoming a concert pianist, but he was shot by a Russian bullet in action and his right arm was really crudely amputated. He used his wealth to commission the leading celebrity composers. There's 3,000 works for left hand alone, but I wanted my repertoire to be as diverse as possible. I wanted more. I hope to have a relationship with these concertos for life. Hopefully my interpretations of these pieces will be celebrated and enjoyed by many. So Paul Wittgenstein, such a fascinating man, and he comes from such a fascinating family, the Wittgensteins. He's brother of the famed philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, and his father being a very super wealthy iron magnate. So they're a real interesting family. They're a real kind of centre of Viennese culture. They were friends with Mahler, and Brahms was often coming to play concerts at their house, and Richard Strauss was a close personal family friend. So they were a real interesting hub of Viennese society. And Paul Wittgenstein, he always dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. But if you come from one of those kind of society families, being a performer of any kind was very much looked down upon. It wasn't something that you were really to pursue, whether it's acting or being a concert performer. So Paul didn't make his concert debut as a two-handed pianist at this time until his father passed away. And then he went and he gave his concert debut to rave reviews. He was a fine pianist. And then the First World War was, it was already happening, and he was called into battle. And it was here, very shortly after his debut as a concert pianist, he was shot by a Russian bullet in action, and he was taken as a prisoner of war, and his right arm was really crudely amputated. As you can imagine, kind of in a prisoner of war situation, they're not taking their time over amputating limbs. They're doing it crudely. They're rushing. And so during this awful time, where he'd only just given a concert debut to rave reviews, to then lose your right hand, I think most people would be absolutely, crushed by that, let alone the prospect of their career that hadn't really even begun to be snatched away from them. So he was sent as a prisoner of war out to Siberia, and he was there for quite some time. And it was here that he started to see if he could work out how to play his beloved two-handed pieces, how he could perhaps arrange them for left hand alone. He knew about left-hand repertoire because previously to him we had Geza Zichy, who was a left-hand alone pianist and a famous left-hand alone pianist, a student of Liszt and a great friend of Franz Liszt. So Wittgenstein was working tirelessly in his head, and then he even used a bit of old charcoal and chalked out on the upturned crate, a wooden crate, he chalked out a piano keyboard to see if he could kind of work things and rework them from his mind. And lucky for him, and lucky for me now with the repertoire that I get to play, he was repatriated back to Vienna. And it was here that his real steely determination as a person, an artist, a performer, really started to shine through, because he used his position in society, he used his wealth in order to commission the leading celebrity composers of the 20th century. So he reached out to close personal friend, Richard Strauss, please write me a piano concerto, which he did. He wrote 2 left-hand piano concertos. He reached out to Benjamin Britten, Ravel, of course, the most famous, Prokofiev. He really did go and commission the leading composers of that time and paid them handsomely for it. And this is really thanks to him that I have a career today, because obviously for me as a one-handed, left-hand alone pianist in the 21st century, I thankfully have access to these wonderful, huge works by these massive kind of 20th century masters, and it really is thanks to Paul Wittgenstein. I mean, obviously, his most fascinating time was that, or for me, the most fascinating time was finding that inner strength of becoming a prisoner of war, losing your right limb, and then coming back home, which most people would be so thankful, they'll be counting their lucky stars that they've survived, that they didn't die, that they didn't get sepsis, whatever it is that, But that wasn't enough for Paul Wittgenstein. That determination bubbled up from within him, and that is what really, I think, astounds me. The audiences back then, the reviews that Wittgenstein received, because obviously he travelled around Europe and even America to perform these and give the premiere performances of these wonderful concertos. And the reviews were really great. I think the general public, if you think what was happening at that time, the war was, over, coming to it, and it was that whole feeling of kind of triumph and kind of, seeing injured men often on the street, and it was that kind of everyone's spirits was lifted, no matter what side you were on, whether you're British or whether, in Germany, Vienna. Everyone's spirits were lifted because it was over and that long period of time had come to an end. And so I feel that the human spirit was very, very buoyant at that time. And it reminds me very similarly to when I performed at the Paralympic closing ceremony in 2012, and I think we all remember as Brits that the 2012 Games and the Paralympic Games were just a special time, that real buoyancy, and there was a fizz of energy in the air. And that is what I think personally it was, reading the reviews, reading between the lines of what these reviews were saying. There was a real appreciation of his victory over his own circumstances by continuing this career, and then showing the British public and the European public that he wasn't going to give up, and that was that messaging that was really, really key. I often get asked that question about, how did it feel having this mantle of responsibility, here in the 21st century? And of course, when I went into playing left-hand alone repertoire, I didn't, think of that. I didn't think that I'm the 21st century one-handed pianist, and I didn't realise obviously my career would take the turns that it has taken. I think I have a huge responsibility. It's for myself as well as future generations, I feel, future generations of disabled artists, that I want to carry on doing Wittgenstein's work. Unfortunately, I'm not the son of a wealthy iron magnate, so I don't have bottomless pits of money like Wittgenstein did to be able to go and commission, vast amounts of money to whoever I kind of cherry-picked and wanted. Luckily for me, and the relationships I have with orchestras, with record labels and things like that, I've been able to commission and continue these commissions, which is so important. And I've really been choosy, I suppose, with what I commission. I wanted to commission something fairly traditional. My first commission was by Nigel Hess, the fantastic composer who most famously composed the theme tune for Ladies in Lavender with Maggie Smith. And that first commission, I really wanted something accessible. I wanted something that would make people sit up and listen and think it was beautiful, and I really wanted that, and he definitely delivered on that. And then moving forward through my career, I then started to, there isn't really any female composers who've written for left-hand alone. Wittgenstein wasn't commissioning any female composers in the 20th century, so I felt that it was my duty again. So my second commission was to a great friend of mine, the film and TV composer Julie Cooper, and she wrote two pieces for me. One of them I'm going to be playing this evening here. And then my third commission was with a disabled artist, disabled composer called Ben Lunn, who's absolutely fantastic, and he wrote a concerto for me called History Needs, which I premiered earlier this year in Glasgow. So I've been picky with kind of who I work with, because I wanted it to be as diverse as possible. And of course, there's more to come with that. There's more projects that are in the pipeline, which I can't announce yet, but I'm really excited to share with the world when I can. So because my repertoire, it's vast repertoire, there's 3,000 works for left hand alone, and there's 30, 31, 32 and counting piano concertos for left hand alone. But I wanted more. I wanted a disabled composer, a person of colour to write, I wanted a woman to write. So all of these things that I'm trying to do, but it's a slow process for me because obviously, there's always constraints to everything in life. There are so many favourites of Wittgenstein's commissions, of course the Ravel. The Ravel for me, it was the first concerto that I learned. I learned it when I was 17 or 18. It's such an important concerto for me as a left-hand alone pianist. It's such an important concerto in the wider public for classical music, and because most people, if you've heard of left-hand repertoire, they most likely have heard of Ravel's Piano Concerto for left hand. So it's a very famous work with left-hand repertoire. So of course that is up there for me. I really, again, I love the Britten. I absolutely love that piece. It's trickier, I find, for me than the Ravel actually. Its theme and variations and typical Britten style, the piano writing isn't easy at all. But I enjoy it. I enjoy a challenge, and I really enjoy the work, and I love the shift through these different variations that Britten, just takes the audience and me, the performer, on. So I would say they are my two favourites. Whenever I'm playing anything, I try not to listen to recordings because it just by osmosis influences, and we all know what it's like. You hear the first, even a pop song, you hear it the first time and almost that's your then definitive version. Then anyone else who does it is never quite right. So I never really listen. Luckily as well for me, and I suppose this is luck, the Wittgenstein recordings that I've listened to have been much later in his career when actually his playing wasn't as good as he was in his younger years. So definitely I wouldn't want to emulate those later recordings. So yeah, I don't ever listen to his recordings in a listening way. I'd listen to them academically when I'm working on something to do with that. I think every artist, we're so passionate about putting our own stamp on things. For me, I hope to have a relationship with these concertos for life. And so me learning and finding out every corner of these concertos and delving into, what I can and finding, and every time you play it, you find out something new and you think, oh, I'm going to do that next time. I liked that. Or, it grows with you, with life, and hopefully that, my interpretations of these two pieces, hopefully at some point will be celebrated and enjoyed by many. I remember when I first started at the Royal College, and obviously my contemporaries, amazing pianists, and there was, you go in there and you hear the oldest students who are possibly prize winners of big international competitions and things, and they're just amazing. You're walking down the corridors as a first-year student and they're practicing, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And I remember when I first started, I kind of felt, well, I should be doing that. I should definitely be doing this kind of at least 8 hours a day. And the reality is the physical limitations of having one hand, and also the repertoire, it's very complex repertoire. I just can't practice for that long. So when I kind of came round to the idea and stopped comparing myself, saying, well, I'm not, it's like comparing apples to pears. You can't compare a left-handed pianist to a two-handed pianist. The different repertoire, different techniques, all sorts of things. So I then kind of started to feel what's the minimum I can practice but get everything done that I need to get done. And for me, that magic number is 4 hours. And I find that with my 4 hours, my hand doesn't hurt. I often get pain in my right shoulder, which is the shoulder I don't have an arm on, and I don't know why that is. But all of it within that 4-hour practice, and obviously not solid, it's with lots of breaks in between. That seems to be my magic number, and I think every artist has their magic number. And I tend to be able to get everything I need done in that 4 hours, so that seems to work for me. And I think that is what stops me from getting injured, because if you compared me to, I suppose, a two-handed pianist, that would be a very short practice session for them, so I think that's why I've not been injured, touch wood, so far. I think I'm also very good at realising, sometimes, and with everything in life, we're just not in the right frame of mind to achieve something. So sometimes I'll sit down at the piano and actually, my mind's not in it, and that's those moments I do actually just abandon ship, and I just think, I'm not going to, just sit here and achieve something which clearly isn't happening. And then it's amazing. 20 minutes later, you can go back, and then it's all fine. You can be in the zone again. So I think I'm very good at listening to my own mind, my own body in those moments, and thinking, you know what, I'll just give it a rest for a minute. I think definitely in the Ravel. Ravel is such a master at kind of taking the audience on a journey through different genres. So, you know, in the beginning, after my big cadenza, then comes this beautiful passage, and it's so jazzy. There are these beautiful jazz chords, and it's so unexpected for Ravel. You know, all of a sudden these real kind of slow but beautiful jazzy kind of chords come through. And then again, about 10 minutes later in the concerto, we're transported to that Oriental influences, which he loved. You know, he loved that chinoiserie kind of, you know, Far East sound. And so we get that twice in the concerto later on. And then again, we get back to this kind of big jazzy kind of, and really big. And the orchestra sometimes in that, which I love, is so powerful. You know, imagine me where I'm sitting, you know, I'm getting it, and I love it. It kind of vibrates through my whole body. It's amazing to see what the orchestra have to do. It's a very virtuosic piece for the orchestra as well, especially they've got a big kind of orchestral cadenza just before my elongated cadenza at the end of the concerto, and that's always fun seeing the musicians brace themselves for that tricky moment. When I first signed my record deal, obviously, you know, records are commercial products. So with most of my original repertoire being, you know, unknown really to the general public, the original way, I wanted to bring in some familiarity, because I feel that when the public listens to something familiar, they're then much more open to listening to something unfamiliar that they've never heard before. So I was careful to pick some pieces that I thought that, you know, one, I would enjoy playing, two, that worked well for left hand alone once I'd kind of arranged them, and three, that the audiences would enjoy and the public would enjoy. And then obviously introducing them to straight away on track 2 or whatever, you know, some repertoire that they would have never have heard. And I think that was, especially on my first album, that was the real kind of, my real driving message really was to get some familiarity and then lots of unfamiliar pieces, and then you know, everyone hopefully by the end of the album enjoys everything they've heard.